So I'm going to be covering hand tools and small equipment. In the culinary industry, there are a lot of hand tools that you're going to become familiar with. And knowing the proper way to use the tools is going to lead to a lot more success in cooking. This presentation that I'm showing you on my screen is going to be available on the resource page, an overview of your Canvas module. So the ones that are in yellow are the ones that are most used. So we keep those in the utensil drawer. There's a separate video that also outlines where we keep those in the food lab. Some of the first hand tools that you'll know the difference between is a bench scraper or a bowl scraper. A bowl scraper has a rounded edge and it is more flexible. And in that one, you would scrape dough or batter out of the bowl. The bench scraper, on the other hand, is more rigid and it's usually made of steel and it has a handle on the top. That blade is metal and that is used to scrape or pick up material off of the work surface. That is part of the cutting station and you'll become very familiar with that. The channel knife is one that cuts lengthwise grooves, typically out of citrus fruit items. You can see here if you want to make a nice little curly rind of a lemon or a lime, which is a very nice garnish. It also incorporates a lot of flavor. Then you would use an item called a channel knife. The peeler, on the other hand, is very different. So the peeler cuts a thick layer of the skin from the fruit or the vegetable. It is more effective than a paring knife. However, some people are more comfortable peeling something like an apple or a potato with the peeling knife. A grater, or often called the cheese grater because that's the most commonly thing it's used for, this is going to shred food into fine pieces. And most of the graters, like this is a box grater, it's going to have different sizes of grooves that cut different sizes or grate different sizes of your food product. So you could get a wide grated shredded cheese, or you could get a real finer one, or you could even take a real hard cheese and then shave it down so it's really fine. A zester is utilized for citrus fruit items, and this is going to take just a tiny little bit of the skin and the oils of the skin off. When it comes to rolling pins, there are 3 different types of rolling pins. The most common is the classic, and this is what most people are familiar with. It has a handle, and then the wood or whatever it's made out of rolls, and it flattens and shapes dough. A baker's rolling pin also flattens and shapes doughs, but it is a straight cylinder, and you utilize your hands to roll it. A French rolling pin, on the other hand, it is tapered. So the center of the rolling pin is going to be thicker than the edges, and this allows you to roll it at an angle and you get different shapes and different thickness. Most everyone is familiar with the round cutter, often referred to as the pizza cutter or a pastry wheel, and this cuts in a forward or backwards pushing motion. A fish scaler is something that we do not have in my classroom. We don't typically butcher down whole or scale whole fish, but you would see that in a large restaurant establishment. A corer has a handle and it has a cylinder on the end with some teeth. And that one you would go straight down through the center of the apple. You want to put the apple on the table and not hold it in your hand. And it's going to take just the core out of the center of the apple. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of this method of coring apples because it really doesn't take all of the rough part, and I still have to take my knife and trim it down. When we do the knife skills unit, I'll actually show you a way to make apple wedges that is a little bit more efficient to me than utilizing the core, and I have actually seen someone give themselves a pretty nasty injury with one of those because they were holding the apple in their hand when they went down with it. A parasine scoop is also called a melon baller. We do have these in my classroom, and these will make a round ball shape, typically out of melons or any soft fruit and vegetables. For a garnish and for presentation, these are highly utilized. You usually have a little end and a larger end. A pastry bag can be made from many different materials. Silicone ones can be washed out, plastic ones are disposable, and then they even have a canvas one. You want to put the tip in the pastry bag first, and then you put the screw on the outside so that the tip is held onto the bag. So you usually have to kind of cut a little bit of the bag off on the end. You don't want to do that very large, and then you slide your tip down, and then you fill it with your food product. You don't ever fill it all the way to the top because you need to be able to make a nice twist so that you can keep good pressure on that. When we do cake and we do simple cake decorating, you will learn the technique and skill for utilizing the pastry bags. A pastry brush is utilized pretty often. It's in yellow, and so we do actually utilize those pretty often to brush melted butter or egg wash or glazes or other liquids onto goods before or after we bake them. The piping tools go with the pastry bag, and they have different tips, and each tip does a different thing. When it comes to spatulas and spreaders, we have all of these varieties in the classroom. The offset spatula is often used for cake frosting or for evening out a layer of batter before you bake the cake. This, on the other hand, is very short and stubby, this sandwich spreader, and typically it is utilized by people who make sandwiches to spread fillings and mayonnaise. The straight spatula is typically used for icing cakes. So this is going to spread your filling and your glazes. It's going to level off dry ingredients, and you could even use it to turn small pancakes. These are very flexible, and so they make a big difference when you're frosting a cake with one. The food mill is used to puree food. We have other mechanical food items in my classroom that we typically use, but I do have a food mill if you'd like to see one of those in person as well. And typically they come with screens in the bottom. So you would put your food in the top and you would turn the handle around and it would push the food through those screens and puree it. A ricer is going to turn food items into rice-like pieces of food. If you have ever had cauliflower that has been rice, people use that as a low carb rice substitute pretty often, and so you may be familiar with one of those. A tamis or a drum sieve. This is essentially a screen that stretches across metal or wood. It is shaped like a drum, and this is used to puree very soft foods, or you can remove solids from purees. If I've made, say, a raspberry puree and I don't want all of the raspberry seeds in my puree, then I could pour it and then brush it over the tamis, and that would remove the seeds, and then the liquid would go through the fine mesh. A cheesecloth is my students often say that they see this around Halloween because people will use this to create a mummy costume. So if you've ever seen the cloth that the white cloth that people might make a mummy costume out of, this is what they actually usually utilize that. But it's a cooking device, and it is a fine mesh gauze, and it's used for straining liquids and bundling herbs. You can also use it to thicken yogurt, or if you're making cheese, you can separate the curds from the whey. Cheesecloth is actually very useful in the kitchen. We use it pretty often. A funnel. I think everybody should be familiar with a funnel. You pour liquids into a funnel, and it comes out of a smaller end on the bottom, and that way you can get liquid from a larger container to a smaller container. And then a sieve is just a sifter. It's going to have a mesh screen to sift flour or other dry ingredients, remove large impurities, or combine and aerate the food product. So we use these pretty often when we're doing when we're mixing our dry ingredients together in baking. These two items will be found in your common drawer: the wire whip or the whisk. And these are used to mix, beat, and stir food items. The rubber spatula is also a scraper, and this is used to fold ingredients together. And these two items here, they both combine, but you have to make sure that you understand the terminology in the recipe. If a recipe asks you to fold together, Then you very gently stir them and you don't overmix. If you whip a food item, then you incorporate air and you beat that food item pretty vigorously, and some ingredients you could ruin if you do that. So it's really important to make sure you understand the recipe terminology so that you don't overmix or undermix or utilize the wrong product. A skimmer is going to be like a big flat spoon with holes in it. And this is going to take foam off of the stock or the soup or remove solid ingredients from liquids. A cook's fork or kitchen fork is just a large two-tined fork, and this will lift items onto a plate or flip items. I typically don't utilize this when I'm cooking because I don't like to pierce my meat and have the juices come out, but that's just me personally. Tongs are the most commonly used tool in the kitchen. Every good chef has some really nice, big, broad tongs. I like the ones with the big gripping hands here. They're a scissor-like utensil, and they pick up and they handle solid food. They're also utilized to mix and stir and combine food around. It's really important when you're using tongs to make sure that they stay clean. If your tongs have touched raw meat or uncooked food items in a pan, you need to either have a different set for cooked or have a clean or sanitizer bucket to dip your tongs into to kill the pathogens on them. Most of your restaurant tongs are color coded, and this color coded indicates whether or not you touch raw food or cooked food with those items. Spoons are solid, perforated, which means it would have holes in it, or slotted, which means that it would have elongated holes in it. Typically, they're made of stainless steel. They generally hold about 3 ounces. A solid spoon will take the liquid and the solid ingredient, and if you have holes in it, it allows the liquids to drain off, such as green beans. A pie server is a specially shaped item. Once you cut a pie, it lifts a slice of a round pie piece up. It's like a wedge spatula.